In a world of animal-like people, the term human refers to mythical creatures depicted in ancient carvings. They are described in old myths and tales as peculiar, frail, and mostly hairless beings, except for the flowing hair on their heads. Despite their strange depiction, there are some in this world who hold a great fascination for them, studying books on the subject. Suddenly, a dog-like citizen looked up, sensing something was amiss. A crowd began to gather as people pointed towards the sky, wondering what the strange object was. About a month ago, a weird object attached to a balloon fell from the skies. A crowd of onlookers stared in awe at the scene unfolding before them. The metal basket splashed down, landing right in the middle of their river. And from within it emerged a fantastical creature, the likes of which they had only read about in stories. A cat-like woman named Tonliko, a spokesperson for the Beastmen Federation, announces that the council has decided the human will be greeted with the utmost care. The human, now designated Subject 1, is escorted by guards. Tonliko notes that he is unlike anything within their scope of biology. Despite his strangeness, she believes he seems to be highly intelligent. One of the guards, however, finds the creature's smooth membrane and baldness unsettling, admitting that the human freaks him out. Tonliko finds the creature ugly and wonders where it came from, finding it strange that some people fantasize about such a thing. The first human anatomy test began. The examination started with his skeleton, which was deemed highly unusual. Among kemonos, a straighter posture is a sign of greater strength. Subject 1's posture is completely straight from head to toe, much straighter than a kimono of the same height. Suddenly, the human lifts a startled Tonliko into the air. She yelps for him to stop, worried about her expensive suit. Dr. Drill, the head of the research team, tells the human to put her down and gives him the scientific name, Bipedus erectus. Tonliko finds the name confusing, but notes that according to their logic, his posture implies he should be stronger than all of them. Another feature that piqued the doctor's interest was the human's hands. Their complex bone structure and long fingers allow for a wide range of precise movements, suggesting he is capable of utilizing their tools. They decided to test his intelligence by giving him a pen, which he immediately knew how to use. He wrote a message introducing himself as Hitoshi Kaneshima, an astronaut from Earth, but they couldn't understand it, realizing he had his own language. Dr. Drill took on the task of trying to decipher the strange writing and drawings. Tonliko thinks Dr. Drill might be a little too into the research, and as she observes the human's hands, she has a strange thought about her own kind. She becomes completely absorbed in playfully batting at the pen he's holding. Dr. Drill interrupts her antics, asking what she is doing. After finally catching the pen, a flustered Tonliko complains that it was a handful before moving on to the next big difference, the skin. She finds it truly unusual that he has barely any fur or hair, apart from on his head. No matter how many times she looks at it, his skin just seems weird to her. She notes the texture of his skin is similar to the beans of their paws. She cautiously touches his chest, finding it smooth as a pumpkin, which helps her get over her reluctance to touch him while he's still. As a colleague calls out her name in surprise, she observes that the human's body is warmer than a kimono's, dissipating a lot of heat without any bad smell. Her colleague calls out again, as Tonliko seems to fall asleep against the human's warm chest. Dr. Drill theorizes the cause of this unusual trait, suggesting it's likely for increased recovery and temperature regulation. Dr. Drill explains that as kimonos evolved, they stood up to dissipate heat more easily, though they never changed much throughout history. He concludes that the biggest advantage of high heat dissipation is being able to cool down the brain, which must be how the human achieved his large, intelligent one. Tonliko listens, finally understanding the implications. Tonliko shouts in disbelief, realizing this means the human is more advanced than them. Dr. Drill tells her to quiet down, reminding her that their reporting meeting will be soon. Meanwhile, other researchers are ecstatic, with one exclaiming that they've scientifically determined it feels really good to be touched by a human. Tonliko sternly asks how their personal feelings are pertinent to the experiment. She questions if they are enjoying his intricacies, to which one researcher stammers. She reminds them that they are professionals and that fantasizing about humans is seen as abnormal, warning that they will be seen as a joke if they report such things. However, another researcher smugly remarks that you can tell how good it would feel just by looking. The researchers let out cries of pleasure as the human playfully squishes their faces. The researchers eagerly line up to be petted by the human while Tonliko watches, flustered. A few days later, the human anatomy illustration is complete. Someone questions why it's clothed, and the reason given is a fear that a naked illustration would raise unwanted suspicions about his hands, which they speculate could be reproductive organs. At the first interim report meeting, Tonliko reports that despite some differences, humans share many physical traits with them, including 5 senses, though his physical strength seems inferior. An official concludes that based on the report, humans are just living beings like them. The public reacts with disappointment, one person remarking what a letdown it is after expecting lasers and annihilation. Another agrees, saying the human is nothing special. Secretary Leon approaches Tonliko and commends her on the good work with the report. Leon says that while every creature deserves to live, the human needs to understand who is in charge. He laughs, finding it absurd that a species would purposefully choose to evolve to be weak and miserable. Tonliko retorts that there must be a better use of time than wasting it on what he deems a failure. Surprised by her tone, Leon listens as she insists that interacting with the intelligent human has been producing great results. Tonliko tells Leon not to worry, assuring him that the research has been fruitful. After he leaves, Dr. Drill approaches, asking if she's bothered by how people are reacting. He reassures her, confident that with enough time, they'll gather enough data to convince even the secretary. A week later, something incredible happened. A note from the human is presented, now translated. It reads, "Hello, Miss Tonriko, my name is Hitoshi Kaneshima. I'm an astronaut. I come from a planet called Earth." Tonriko is shocked that even though they've been teaching him, Hitoshi learned their language so easily and began calling her by name. The team has been working overtime to provide him with a vast amount of material, including books on common facts and simple history. Dr. Drill was very enthusiastic about this progress and was happy to give him more material. Hitoshi utterly devours anything they throw at him, not even needing glasses to read. Later, they finally figured out the biggest mystery about the human Hitoshi, his origin. The revelation that he traveled all the way from a different solar system is almost too much to believe, and Tonliko wonders how it's even possible. Their research revealed that human technology far exceeds their own. Secretary Leon confronts Tonliko, asking if there are issues causing the report to be late. He warns her that people are getting worried the alien might be dangerous. He advises her to be careful, but not to delay the report too much. A few days later, Dr. Drill collapsed. He had apparently forgotten to sleep while reading Hitoshi's space diary and was sent to the hospital. Tonliko feels the immense stress of the situation. The burden is especially heavy now that she has to manage the research alone. Though differences in vocal cords make it hard for Hitoshi to speak, his reading and writing have improved every day. He even sent a kind letter to Dr. Drill in the hospital, wishing him good health, which surprises the doctor. As Tonliko writes her report, she has to admit something. She admits to herself that she is very scared of him. She hates to admit it, but it's true that he is far more intelligent than they are. It is clear he possesses his own culture. She wonders how he feels about his treatment and if he is as sociable as they are. She questions if he hates them or plans to attack. The terrifying thought that this could mean annihilation crosses her mind. Her growing fear makes it increasingly difficult for her to talk to him. The Human Research Project status is updated. It has been cancelled. Due to risks and security concerns, the project is terminated and the subject's execution will be evaluated. Tonliko stares in utter disbelief, murmuring, "What?" Secretary Leon confirms her fears. Subject 1 shall be executed. When Tonliko asks why, he claims it's because the human carries dangerous pathogens, possibly explaining Dr. Drill's collapse. Tonliko frantically argues they haven't confirmed that, and if it were true, the rest of the team would be contaminated too. Leon retorts that it's too risky regardless. Leon reveals his true fear, asking if she isn't worried about an entire species more advanced than them. Tonliko admits she is worried, but insists that simply killing him isn't right. Leon grabs her, shouting that they don't know what he's capable of and must strike now, arguing it's not fair to the human. Tonliko protests, arguing that they live in a democratic society where the death penalty requires an orderly trial. Leon roars back that Hitoshi is not a kimono, has no rights, and that they can execute him swiftly without public notice. He screams that the human will doom them all, while Hitoshi sits writing, unaware of the argument. At Tonliko's home, her mother finds her face down in a cushion and scolds her for ruining her clothes, saying she's been like this ever since she returned. Tonliko just mutters for them to leave her alone. Her younger sister teases her, saying she never knew Tonliko was so fond of that human and joking that she's going to kill herself. Then she announces a letter has arrived from her office, wondering if it's from Hitoshi. Tonliko sits up abruptly at the mention of his name. Her sister reads the envelope to Miss Tonriko. In his letter, Hitoshi writes that he heard the news and regrets not getting to tell her or Dr. Drill the purpose of his journey. His goal was to find any signs of intelligent life in deep space. He explains that as far as humans could see, they were alone, but they theorized a planet similar to Earth was possible. He explains he was put into cryostasis for the long journey, as the great distance meant they were out of harm's way. He slept for a very long time, soaring aimlessly through space. After finding nothing among countless stars, he began to regret his mission, but finally a flicker of light appeared. He had finally found it, when he basked his eyes in the view of their world. He was overjoyed. They were far away, but he had found the truth. They were not alone in this universe. They had fulfilled his dreams. Dr. Drill reads the letter. Hitoshi writes that he doesn't know how they reacted to his appearance, but he couldn't hide his own enthusiasm. He adds that he truly became a furry, a term that confuses the doctor. Hitoshi concludes that no matter how the situation ends, he is extremely happy to have met them. He signs off, thanking them for all they've done. The letter fills Tonliko with a new resolve. Her sister is surprised as Tonliko suddenly gets up, grabs her coat and pistol and runs out, declaring that Hitoshi has seen nothing yet. Resolved not to let it end like this, Tonliko begins to address an assembly. She introduces herself as the spokesperson for the federal government, Miss Tonriko. She announces that she is there to share her personal views of the human Hitoshi and to make a plea. The Human Research Project's final council is in session. As a member of the Kemono species, Tonliko passionately begs everyone to lend Hitoshi their assistance. An official demands to know what she's doing. She explains that under the secretary's orders, Hitoshi is incarcerated on death row. She cries out that he is all alone. She declares she can't view him as they do, knowing he gambled his life on a journey to find them and now has no home to return to. She recounts how immediately after his arrival, he forgave their unjust treatment and tried his hardest to learn to speak with them, doing nothing but interacting peacefully. She declares that even before meeting them, he considered them friends. Dr. Drill and the research team burst in, with the doctor declaring that Hitoshi is simply a friend who came from very far away. He shouts that he doesn't care for Hitoshi's appearance or the way he evolved, because that doesn't matter one bit. He argues that being so afraid of someone that you would kill them just because of how they evolved would mean that they haven't truly evolved at all. Tonliko shouts that they are way better than that and cannot call themselves a civilized society if they act this way. She screams that if they abandon him now, they would be nothing more than savages. The crowd is silent for a moment. Then they erupt in outrage, calling her a traitor and questioning her sanity. One member shouts about how shameful it is to have a human lover as a representative of the council. Pushed to her limit, Tonliko snaps, screaming back, "So what if I'm into humans?" She defiantly yells, "I can like whoever I want." As an aide calls her name in shock, Tonliko fully confesses, "You want me to say it out loud? Yes, I love him," she declares, challenging anyone to point her to the law that dictates who she should love. The door to Hitoshi's cell opens. A guard tells Hitoshi that he may now leave. Hitoshi looks up as he's told he's free to go. Down the hall, Dr. Drill waits, watching as Hitoshi is escorted out. Dr. Drill apologizes for the delay, noting that Hitoshi must be very tired. He tells Hitoshi to please rest for as long as he needs. He gives an order to prepare a suit for him. Hitoshi is then led into a large hall to stand before a line of officials. An official formally addresses him as Mr. Kaneshima Hitoshi. He declares that Hitoshi is now officially recognized as a diplomat from Earth and will be allowed to stay on their planet indefinitely as one of them. A wish for their friendship to last forever hangs in the air. A new law is passed. The ethnic groups known as Kemonos and humans shall now coexist, with humans having the same rights. Tonliko explains that he is now considered one of them. She then bows deeply, apologizing profusely for how they treated him, while Hitoshi looks on, surprised. Tonliko introduces her new co-worker Hitoshi, describing him with admiration, completely bald except for his head, proudly standing upright, extremely intelligent and treating others with kindness. She adds that his speech isn't perfect due to his vocal cords, but the other Kemono seems confused by her glowing description. Hitoshi, now able to speak their words, turns to Tonliko and smiles, simply saying thank you. Moved to tears, Tonliko remembers Dr. Drill's words, He came from a distant world and he is a friend. In this world where animals have evolved into the dominant intelligent species, a question lingers. While they have always loved animals, could the same be said in return? Here, the creature known as Hito, or human, is merely a work of fiction. They are described in tales as weak yet cunning monsters, peculiar for having hair grow only on their heads. And among the beast people, there are those called Hytners, who feel a strange affection for these mythical beings. A crowd of beast people walking along a pier suddenly looks to the sky. One of them points, asking what the strange object is. The reason these minor fictional creatures suddenly attracted so much attention happened about a month ago with the arrival of a strange vessel. A crowd of beast people gathered in shock. A single Hito, a creature from myth, emerged from a metal cage. After it crash-landed in their lake. Alone on an alien planet, a human astronaut stands at the door of his crashed vessel. This is the beginning of the highly acclaimed story about beastkin and humans. The story moves to the Western Beastkin Commonwealth, Gargan Stronghold. A cat-like woman introduces herself as Tonliko, press secretary for the Beastkin federal government. She explains that she is overseeing public relations for the special council that will decide the legal ramifications of the creature's arrival. As the human is escorted by guards, Tonliko reports that the unknown species, dubbed Hito-1, defies their very foundation of biology. She concedes that it seems to be rather intelligent. However, she finds its hair-raising appearance, a body like a mucous membrane with hair only on its head, to be deeply unsettling. Tonliko cannot understand how Hytners can stomach such a vulgar creature and wonders about its origin. The first round of physical examinations commences. The most distinctive feature is its strange skeletal structure. Like the chemo, it stands upright, but while chemo postures become more curved with size, the Hitos remain straight. Despite being much taller than a chemo of similar weight, the Hito-1 stands perfectly straight, staring down at Tonliko. Suddenly, he lifts the startled Tonliko, who yells at him to put her down, exclaiming she didn't ask to be lifted. Dr. Drill, the chief of research, calmly orders the Hito to put her down and dubs this phenomenon true bipedalism. Tonliko finds the doctor's choice of wording problematic, as it implies chemo are somehow inferior to Hito. The doctor also took a particular interest in another part of its skeletal structure, its hands. The Hito's forelimbs are high performance, capable of handling tools with extreme precision and a wide breadth of motion, perhaps as skillfully as their own. To test this, they had it grasp a pen. With its high intelligence, it immediately recognized the tool and imitated writing. However, they concluded it was merely imitation, as it only produced nonsensical letters. But Dr. Drill, interpreting the letters as the Hito's unique language, intended to analyze them, a notion Tonliko finds absurd. Tonliko thinks the doctor might be overly invested, as such a bizarre creature shouldn't exist according to their theory of evolution. Meanwhile, the Hito twirls the pen. She gets carried away, batting playfully at its hands. Dr. Drill interrupts, startling her by asking what she is doing. Feeling victorious from their encounter, Tonliko determines the Hito's hands are nothing noteworthy and moves on to address its skin. This, she notes, is where they differ the most as species, as its bare skin is entirely hairless outside of its head. Getting a closer look only confirms her feelings of disgust. She touches its chest, noting the texture is similar to their paw pads. She reflects that if not required for work, she never would have done so, as the idea of a creature made entirely of that material is abnormal. As a colleague calls out her name, she observes that its body is much warmer to the touch due to a lack of insulating hair, and its odor is not all that repugnant. A colleague calls out her name again, as Tonliko appears to have fallen asleep against the Hito's chest. She thinks to herself that her exhaustion must have gotten the better of her after so many days of inspections. Meanwhile, Dr. Drill announces he has a hypothesis on why Hito may have evolved to look the way they do, suggesting it may be a result of needing to reduce their body temperature. Dr. Drill explains that as beasts evolved into chemo, their upright postures made it easier to regulate body temperature, leading to a decrease in body hair. He continues, explaining that the evolutionary reasoning for Hito being bipedal and hairless would be a desire to gain more high-functioning brains, as their biggest advantage is being able to cool them. Tonliko agrees that it makes sense, but then pauses as a thought strikes her. She shouts, asking if his logic doesn't conclude that Hito are further along the evolutionary chain than they are. Dr. Drill hushes her, insisting they must refrain from making inferences that might cause unnecessary controversy before their interim report. A colleague calls out to her, flustered. 3 other researchers discuss a common story trope. If you let a Hito pet you, it feels so overwhelmingly good you might faint. They wonder aloud if it's true. Tonliko asks what good it would do for them to verify something like that. One of the researchers stammers as she accuses them of being hypnos. She continues, stating that hypnos are nonconformists with unusual fetishes, and if someone like that were on their inspection committee, they'd be the laughingstock of the country. She asserts that it's obvious there's absolutely no chance being petted by such a bizarre creature could feel good. Despite her words, her colleagues are clearly enjoying being petted by the Hito, one letting out a loud "Naiha." Another meows with pleasure as it's rubbed. A flustered Tonliko watches as a line of researchers waits for their turn to be petted by the Hito. A few days later, a diagram of the Hito is prepared for the interim report conference. It is clothed to spare the public from the negative emotional impact of its bare skin, and its hands have been censored, having been found to be virtually identical to genitals. At a large press conference, Tonliko takes the stage. She begins the first press conference regarding the inspection's interim report. She reports that while there are many unique aspects to the Hito's physical functions, its 5 senses aside from sight, as well as its muscle strength, are all significantly inferior to chemo. An official seated behind her summarizes their current assessment: Hito are the lesser creatures. The public reacts with disappointment, one person remarking how boring it is, having expected some kind of invader. Another agrees, saying it's just as weak as they thought and an affront to God. Suddenly, a large lion-like man, Director Leon, approaches, laughing loudly and congratulating Miss Tonliko on her amusing report. Director Leon tells her that proper discipline is required when dealing with unidentified creatures to ensure they know who is further up the food chain. He laughs, saying he can only imagine the stress she's been under observing such a wretched, unevolved monster day in and day out. He continues, saying if it had any intelligence, it would feel shame for living in that body. Tonliko retorts that he is exceptionally intelligent and their daily interactions have held much meaning, which seems to surprise Leon. Tonliko coolly informs Director Leon that their observations are proceeding apace and he needn't worry on her account. Leon falls silent for a moment before walking away. Dr. Drill approaches, remarking with amusement that he's surprised to see her take such offense after she had insisted on treating one as inferior herself. Tonliko claims it was nothing of the sort. Dr. Drill tells her that while it may be frustrating, for now, they must continue to accumulate objective data. And eventually, even those pretentious directors will have no choice but to cease their disrespect. 6 days after resuming observations, things took a massive leap. A note is revealed, written in their language. It reads, "Hello Ms. Tonliko, my name is Hitoshi Kaneshima. My job is to travel 2 other planets, thank you." Tonliko is shocked. In an attempt to find a method of communication, they had set out to teach him their writing system, but she never imagined he would be able to communicate so clearly. The inspection team went into a frenzy, selecting words, grammar, and history for him to memorize. Dr. Drill became so engrossed in writing back and forth with him that he neglected his actual work as a scholar. They couldn't keep up with his pace, and Tonliko wondered how he could spend so much time reading without needing glasses. 3 days after they began written communications, Hitoshi was able to give them information on where he came from, a mystery they hadn't dreamed they'd learn from his own mouth. He informed them that he'd come from a far-off planet upon a ship, an idea so unbelievable that Tonliko wasn't sure she could believe it. However, if it were true, it would mean his people's scientific and technological advancements could dwarf theirs entirely. Director Leon calls out to Miss Tonliko. He asks if she's run into trouble, as her reports have been at a standstill. She denies it, claiming administrative procedures have simply increased the time needed. Leon brushes it off, saying the people would like to have the monster's powerlessness confirmed sooner rather than later. He appreciates her thoroughness, but urges her not to keep them waiting, leaving Tonliko looking worried. 6 days after they began written communications, Dr. Drill collapsed. It was due to overwork. He'd been so engrossed in reading Hitoshi's space journals that he'd forgotten to sleep. Tonliko is glad it was nothing serious, but thinks he's old enough to know how to take care of himself. Out of necessity, she ended up having to take on all on-site administrative responsibilities. While Hitoshi was unable to learn to speak, likely due to a difference in vocal cords, he was able to understand their words, and their method of communicating reached near perfection. They kept the doctor up to date with letters while he remained bedbound, much to his surprise. However, as she writes another letter, Tonliko admits that she has something she must confess. She writes that she believes she has come to fear him. Whether she likes it or not, she understands now that he's far more intelligent than they are. He is not a cultureless, solitary creature in this world. If he has the same sensitivity and social understanding as they do, she wonders what he must think of the way they've treated him. Surely he must resent them, and it would not be inconceivable for him to be considering retaliation. The thought that he could call upon his comrades from home to wage war against them fills her with dread. In any case, her fear of him is so great that she can't bring herself to look his way. The first round of inspections have been cancelled, and an emergency decision has been made out of consideration for the people's safety. Tonliko looks up, utterly bewildered, and can only say, "What?" Director Leon appears, asking if she didn't hear him clearly. He states bluntly, "One is to be put down." Tonliko asks why, and Leon explains it seems the Hito carried harmful pathogens onto their planet, which is likely why Dr. Drill collapsed. Tonliko protests that this hasn't been confirmed and others would have been affected. Leon retorts that she is correct. This is merely a formality for the higher-ups, and the reason doesn't truly matter. Director Leon's face contorts with fear and anger as he declares that the monster cannot remain, for it is far more advanced than them. Tonliko protests that this doesn't make it okay, saying she knows he's been worried himself. Leon shouts back that this is a matter of keeping their entire race safe, claiming those on top always come for the ones below them. Tonliko argues that they are a law-abiding society of structure and order and cannot simply execute someone without going through the proper channels. Leon roars that execution is a term for chemo. This is a disposal. As long as they finish it before the people learn the truth, no problems should arise. He reveals their goal is to buy enough time for it to look like death from emaciation, but that monster will be disposed of. 4 days later, at Tonliko's family home, her mother finds her collapsed on the floor and scolds her for showing up unexpectedly and wrinkling her suit. Tonliko, dejected, mutters for them to just leave her be. Her younger sister teases her, asking if it's true she's a hitiner now. Tonliko warns her not to make her punch her. The sister mentions that a letter has been forwarded from her office, from some Hitoshi guy. At the mention of his name, Tonliko whips her head up. She takes the letter, which is addressed to Miss Press Secretary Tonliko. Hitoshi writes that he senses the observations will be winding down soon and has decided to write to her and the doctor as there are still things he'd like to tell them. The goal of his journey was to explore regions of space where humankind had yet to set foot. This was because they had theoretically proven there may be a planet out there, an exact mirror image of their own. Thus was the journey he undertook, leaving his home behind and going into a deep sleep for the years it would take, all in the hopes of finding a planet they weren't even sure truly existed. The most likely outcome was that he would perish alone in the void, cursing ever having left his planet in the first place. He writes that he'll never forget the joy he felt when their towns came into view. And he saw there were people waiting for him, bringing him to tears. They taught him that despite how far away they were, they had neighbors out there, and that they weren't alone in this universe. In his hospital bed, Dr. Drill reads Hitoshi's letter, where he confesses he's not sure how he appears to them, but he loves them with all his heart. Hitoshi's note declares himself an official kemoner, a term that puzzles the doctor. Hitoshi writes that no matter what happens from here on out, he is truly proud to have met them. He signs off thanking them for everything, Hitoshi Kaneshima. After finishing the letter, Tonliko sits in stunned silence. Tears well up in her eyes. She leaps to her feet, grabs her coat and a pistol, and shouts that she's heading out, leaving her sister to wonder what's happening. This concludes her look behind the curtain. She is determined to speak about what they've experienced in their interactions with Hitoshi. She resolves to speak not as press secretary for the Beastkin federal government, but as simply Tonliko. The final press conference regarding the first round of Hito inspections begins. A single chemo, Tonliko, stands at the podium, speaking before the entire population of their planet in the hopes that she can save a single friend. Director Leon roars, demanding to know what she thinks she's doing. Tonliko announces that Hitoshi is currently being held captive without food at the director's command. She stands on a box to reach the microphone, declaring that he is all alone in that room. He knew the perils and still risked his life on a one-way journey in the hopes of finding a new world, with no way to return home and no promise of ever seeing another Hito again. She argues that since the day he arrived, he has said nothing against their unfair treatment of him. He was always adjusting himself to match them, and instead learned their words in an earnest attempt to communicate. She continues, her voice filled with emotion, because at the end of his long journey, he saw them as neighbors. The research team, led by Dr. Drill, bursts in, arguing that to treat a friend who'd come from so far across space with such disrespect simply because his body and species differ from theirs, or because they may not like that he's further along in an evolutionary sense, is wrong. They declare that any country that leaves him to die alone like this could never consider themselves civilized. They would be no better than beasts themselves. She screams that if they were to forsake this man, they would have regressed back to their primitive ancestors. The crowd falls silent for a moment. Then the heckling begins. They shout that Hitners are morally bankrupt and that she's just some Hitner. One member shouts, asking if Hitners aren't ashamed of themselves. Losing her composure, Tonliko roars back, "What the hell's so bad about being a Hitner?" She screams that it isn't their damn business, jolting a member of the crowd. As an aide begs her to calm down, Tonliko shouts, asking if they didn't get anything from what she just said. She declares, "I love the guy," and questions who gave them the authority to judge others based on who they love. The door to Hitoshi's cell creaks open. A guard stammers, telling him to come out. He addresses him formally as Mr. Hitoshi Kaneshima and asks him to please step out. As Hitoshi is escorted down the hall, he's greeted by Dr. Drill. Dr. Drill apologizes for taking so long and remarks that Hitoshi is a tough one for still being able to walk. He tells Hitoshi they'll give him some time to recuperate and then get him some proper formal attire. Hitoshi is then led into a large, empty hall where a line of officials awaits. Tonliko watches from the line of officials. A mustached official steps forward to address Sir Hitoshi Kaneshima. He declares that they hereby temporarily recognize him as an official diplomat of the planet known as Earth and grant him permission to remain within their borders indefinitely. A wish for their bond to last unto eternity is made. Walking through a cemetery, Tonliko explains that the Beastkin Commonwealth has made the decision to reclassify Hito, granting him equality in the eyes of the law as simply being chemo from another planet. She explains that Hito have been classified as a mammal similar to apes, and bowing deeply, she promises he will never again be subjected to such disrespect. She tells Hitoshi that they'll be working together from now on. The official report now states Hito are true bipedal creatures, exceptionally intelligent, and can communicate through writing. She notes that due to their different vocal cords, they have trouble producing their sounds, but Hitoshi then speaks her name, Tonliko, causing her to pause. The report continues, stating that Hito are nevertheless capable of speaking their language. Hitoshi smiles and says thank you, and thus they can begin to truly understand each other. As Dr. Drill once wrote, they are evolutionary companions from a far-off world. Overcome with emotion, Tonliko covers her face. This is the story of what happened after a human arrived on the planet of Beastkin. Everyone has heard of the real-life creature known as the Hito, haven't they? With their exceedingly high intelligence, upright skeletal structure, and smooth, hairless bodies barring the tops of their heads, they are miraculous beings once thought bound to fairy tales made real. As Hitoshi emerges from the pool, Tonliko wonders, "And might I present one to you?" The cameras of the press flash wildly. As cameras flash, Dr. Drill questions Lady Tonliko, saying he doesn't believe so many photos of him post-swim are particularly necessary. He also asks what use she has for photos of him simply walking alongside, noting that these are records. The crowd murmurs about the Hito, with one commenting that the water makes his skin glisten, calling it gross. These are records of their exchanges with the last of an alien species, which underwent a similar yet distinct evolutionary path to their own. Known as the Hito Hitoshi Kaneshima, a train chugs along an elevated track over a bustling city at night. Inside, someone congratulates Hitoshi, announcing that their gauntlet of sports tests is now concluded. The tests included long-distance Menko, fugly-ball, judo, and swimming. Press Secretary Tonliko, also labeled a Hitner, happily announces that Hitoshi set new records in all of them, though she notes it was their first time keeping records for a Hito. However, Dr. Drill, advisor to the Hito Research Committee, clarifies that compared to a chemo athlete, his results aren't particularly outstanding. Instead, he says they should pay attention to his ability to perform them all competently. Dr. Drill explains that depending on their species, chemo can vary wildly in physique and characteristics. While they may demonstrate unparalleled capability in their areas of expertise, they will continue to fail in areas they lack. In contrast, Hitoshi was able to complete each event to a high standard. The dexterity and flexibility to perform any action flawlessly may be exactly what a Hito's body is built for. Tonliko muses that if they created a sport involving running, throwing, swimming, and petting, Hitoshi would prove peerless. He then gets her attention. He shows her a written question: how did chemo society come to be made up of so many different species? Tonliko is puzzled, wondering if it wasn't just the natural course of things. Dr. Drill explains that their natural course would be considered unnatural on his planet, and that not even they fully grasp the details of how it came about. Dr. Drill explains that their evolutionary path should be similar to what the Hito underwent. Their brains increased in size as they grew to walk on two legs, freeing their forelimbs to use tools and secure food more efficiently. Where they differ, however, is that multiple species likely underwent this evolution at the same time. With their herds all growing in size simultaneously, conflicts broke out, and fighting other equally intelligent beings was a difficult ordeal. So they gradually began to avoid this wherever possible. Moreover, owing to their differing species, they eventually culminated in a more peaceful coexistence. Their diets and territories did not tend to overlap, allowing for trade and cooperation. Carnivores hunted beasts, while herbivores cultivated open lands. Omnivores employed both methods. Language then spread as a means of communication between the groups. Thus, civilization truly began. Dr. Drill finishes, saying that's the gist of how chemo society came to be. However, the crucial question of why so many species of beastkin simultaneously evolved to stand upright remains their greatest mystery to this day. Tonliko lists some theories: climate change, rough terrain, or a larger predator, but notes no geological strata or fossils have been found to support any of them. Hitoshi listens, pondering the question. Hitoshi holds up a notepad, presenting a theory of his own which surprises Tonliko. He points to the moon outside the train window, his note suggesting it was because they found the moon to be beautiful. Dr. Drill and Tonliko are stunned into silence. His theory continues: upon witnessing the beauty of the starry sky, they may have felt a desire to reach out and touch it, culminating in them standing before they were even conscious of it. Tonliko giggles, remarking that Hitoshi has seemed highly interested in their night sky, leading to these romantic statements. Dr. Drill grumbles, questioning how a scholar can be so incapable of reading the room, as it's believed prehistoric beastkin had color vision deficiency. With the survey of his motor functions complete, the government's period of observation over him is also finished. Soon his long-held wish will be fulfilled. While he'll still require escorts and have some restrictions, he'll be able to wander the streets of their chemo society. Looking out at the city lights, Tonliko reflects that though they've made many mistakes, they'll finally be able to meet each other as equals. At the far end of the road he traveled to reach their planet, Hitoshi, the last of the Hito, can at last begin his life anew with them. The next day, Hitoshi is brought to his assigned residence, provided by the Beastkin Commonwealth government. Hitoshi looks terribly ill, his eyes sunken and dark. Beside him, Tonliko is a blur of panic. They have arrived at the Central Commonwealth Matchloke General Hospital. A doctor explains that the issue was likely caused by resident bacteria in the pool water or the chlorine, with one or both being incompatible with a Hito's mucous membrane. Hitoshi, his eyes bandaged, reflects that their races were never meant to meet in the first place. Tonliko sighs in relief as the doctor says it's only a little inflammation and there's no need for hospitalization. However, the doctor adds bluntly that she's afraid of it being there for too long anyway. Hitoshi was ordered to remain on bed rest in his residence until he could remove his bandages. Tonliko feels bad for him since he can't see the night sky. Since he was also unable to cook, they suggested he visit the government building for meals, but Tonliko points out that would contradict the bed rest order. With a determined look, she announces she's taking it upon herself to provide for him. Hitoshi insisted he didn't blame them for what happened, but Tonliko still can't rest without making it up to him. She decides to check what he has on hand to cook. She's amazed to find the pantry is full of things she's never seen before, and she remembers that Hitoshi would truly eat anything. From meat and vegetables to grains and seaweed, he would try anything, putting even the most adventurous omnivores to shame. His diet even included foods her people had never tasted before. She picks up something she initially thinks is a fillet of fish, but it's too dry and stiff as a board. She notices items on the back shelves, guessing these must be the spices he mentioned, though asked not to touch them, she's too curious. She examines some small, dark pellets, thinking they don't smell edible, but then decides she shouldn't count things out without trying them. She recalls that in the beginning of their observations, when they didn't understand the Hito's eating habits, they were trying anything and everything. Hitoshi sympathized with their intentions and would try anything first before forming an opinion, even if he didn't like how it looked or smelled. Thinking back on it now, she realizes that was how he communicated with them before he'd even begun to learn their words. Resolved to return the favor and discover what this spicy flavor tastes like, she says, "Well then, down the hatch." She chews thoughtfully, remarking that she's quite fond of the texture it has. Later, at the Central Commonwealth Matchloke General Hospital, Tonliko lies in a hospital bed, her face a mask of horror. She declares, "I have witnessed the fires of hell." Her sister stands by her bedside, remarking that unfortunately, it will take some time to purge. Tonliko laments that it seems she's still there. Dr. Drill sits by her bed, chiding her for being reckless and asking if she has any idea how much she worried Hitoshi. Tonliko moans that it felt like she was swallowing flames and wonders how the Hito can eat that stuff, calling their digestive ability incredible. Dr. Drill explains they can consume things only the most specific of chemo species can, like salt, capsaicin, alcohol, and caffeine. They have a resistance to toxicity that exceeds any known animal. They are no mere omnivores. Tonliko wonders why they would evolve in such a useless way, suggesting prehistoric Hito must have had a lot of time on their hands. Dr. Drill tells her to perish the thought. He explains that this is an important characteristic that makes them what they are. Being able to eat anything means that they can live wherever they please. If their forests wither, they move to the grasslands, lose those and they still have prairies. Should those die out, they can find somewhere even further off. Dr. Drill adds that their unique flexibility and endurance have become evident. They can adapt to temperature extremes, run far without succumbing to exhaustion, create and hurl spears with precision, and swim far enough to reach islands Chemo could never dream of reaching. The fact that Hitoshi referred to it as a starry sky is proof of how long they've spent considering the stars, likely learning to use them to navigate the sea far sooner than the Chemo did. They must dominate the environment wherever they go, shattering each location's ecological pyramid, and then heading on to the next. There is no world in which even their strongest of beasts could have evolved in this way. They journey until the entire world's been consumed. That is what it means for there to be a single species of primate upon a planet. Tonliko lies in her bed, silent and contemplative. Dr. Drill tells Tonliko he will revise her wording to avoid the people mistaking Hito for the fearsome creatures she illustrates them as. She weakly agrees. However, he has one last thing to tell her. Out of consideration for Hitoshi's safety, the decision has been made to indefinitely postpone granting him full freedom to settle where he pleases. An official states that Central will be keeping a tight leash on him, similar to when he first arrived. If she can't return to his side, this new system will go into effect immediately, causing Tonliko to cry out in protest. Tonliko argues that they'll only be regressing to how they treated him during his observations. Dr. Drill doubts they will treat him with that level of disrespect, but confirms he will certainly be lacking in freedoms. He explains that since Hitoshi has learned to communicate, it's easy to forget that he is still an unknown creature from some far-flung galaxy. As they have no idea what else could pose a risk to him, keeping him under surveillance isn't necessarily a bad decision. The worst-case scenario, Dr. Drill explains, is that their negligence leads to his demise, and they cannot let that happen. A determined Tonliko sprints away from the hospital. Back in her bed, she declares, "Okay, it's all out now." The doctor tells Tonliko she should be fine to leave once her appetite returns, and that her usual diet should be easy to digest. Tonliko replies she's not hungry at the moment. The doctor advises that the main takeaway from this experience should be not to do anything as reckless as trying to imitate an alien diet again, adding that it's no normal creature. Tonliko's sister interrupts, insisting Hito aren't monsters. She declares they're sincere, kind, and incredibly intelligent, but the doctor cuts her off. The doctor insists that the thing is a bona fide monster, trusting her nose after seeing all manner of chemo in her time. Tonliko's sister argues it isn't about him appearing violent or carrying pathogens, but rather about his unusual fragility and cleanliness. The doctor asks if she can imagine how badly something like that could mess up their town, a creature that can only be healthy in an environment which excludes all other species. She concludes that Hito are incapable of living on this planet. Lying in bed, Tonliko's sister dismisses the doctor's words as a personal, prejudiced opinion, stating they don't have enough information to fully understand the Hito's ecology. Tonliko reflects that she has no room to judge the doctor, as she acted similarly when she first met Hitoshi. She assumes plenty of other chemo out there must feel the same way, and that opinion may not be reflected in the general populace, even with the government claiming he's friendly. But then a nurse enters, calling for Miss Tonliko. She announces that a gift has arrived from the Hito. It appears to be food, so it's been inspected for safety and it smells incredible. Tonliko's sister says she doesn't feel up to it, but the nurse exclaims that it came with a letter as well. Her sister takes the letter, amazed that the Hito can really write. She reads the letter, which begins, "Miss Tonliko, I'm truly sorry for what happened to you." Hitoshi writes that he should have explained more clearly how toxic some of those ingredients could be to chemo. He explains that the ecosystem of this planet is so different from his home, yet there are many things similar to what they would consume. He's been experimenting to see if he could process the local ingredients in a way that would allow him to recreate his home's dishes so that the people here could try them. He writes that he made her a porridge with ingredients safe for cats to ingest while she's in the hospital, using broth from boiled dried fish to season the grains. He heard that chemo emphasized their sense of smell over taste, so he tried to make something that would appeal to that first and foremost. The nurses are captivated by the delectable aroma. She brings a spoonful to her lips. She chews slowly, savoring the taste. As she eats, tears begin to stream down her face. The nurse asks in shock if it's so good she's crying over it. The aroma drifts down the hall, and Tonliko reflects on Hitoshi's journey. Prepared for the worst, he set off from his home planet and traveled an unimaginable distance across space to finally arrive on their own. Other chemo in the hospital are captivated by the aroma. The other patients in the ward clamor for a taste of the food. Yet here, Tonliko thinks he's looked at with disgust and isolated from the rest of them. Quarantined alone in some out-of-reach place, he gazes out at their illuminated town from his lonely window, nothing more in the people's minds than some mysterious new creature. As the others beg her for just a tiny bite, Tonliko clutches the bowl, thinking that it hurts too much to think about. Despite his unmatched bravery, and despite how miraculous his arrival here even was. Just then, the nurses are called away for an emergency patient. As they leave, Tonliko thinks to herself that he never deserved to be treated this way. Meanwhile, a doctor tells Hitoshi he should be all right now and to go ahead and gently remove the gauze. Hitoshi removes the bandage, his eyes now clear. Tonliko, now back in her suit, visits Hitoshi with Dr. Drill. She says she's overjoyed to see he's recovered and would like to apologize again for what happened. She dismisses her own ordeal as simply a minor case of food poisoning, from which she has also recovered. Hitoshi replies that, in fact, he feels better than ever thanks to that gift she sent him. Dr. Drill announces that although they have hit many bumps in the road, they have at last brought their investigation into the ecology of this individual Hito to a close. Tonliko adds that they may now commence their full-scale investigation into the Hito's Earth, a planet which, despite its incredible distance, boasts the most similarities to their own in terms of environment and society. It is a frightening thing to not know the true nature of another, yet this provides the opportunity to learn more about them. They are still in the early stages of getting to know each other. The better they can come to understand the Hito, the less reason they will have to hold him at arm's length. They are gathered here now so that they can find a way for Hitoshi to exist on this planet in order to avoid ever having to lock him up again. An official declares that now seems a good place to stop, as their only goal for today was to get greetings out of the way. Dr. Drill points out that they've got a clear view of the full moon tonight. Tonliko recognizes it as a thoughtful gesture from Dr. Drill. The sun has just finished setting as they step outside, and Hitoshi seems happy to see the night sky for the first time in days. While this scenery is nothing out of the ordinary for them, to the Hito's eyes, it must appear vibrant beyond compare. As he comments on the moon's beauty with a satisfied look, Tonliko thinks that if it can be their gift to him, then she is happy to give it. The beginning of understanding another is unchanging in its beauty. Thus begins Chapter 2, I, Hito. In the Central Beastkin Commonwealth, Director Leon of the Safety Committee rallies support for his hardline stance. He vehemently argues that the creature known as Hito, having subjugated its own planet, is inherently dangerous. He declares that its culture can only bring harm, and communicating with it is like ingesting poison. Therefore, it must be expelled from their world immediately. Tonliko watches as Director Leon continues his condemnation of Hitoshi, clinging to his position even after the recent turmoil. She finds it ungrateful that he's letting everything slide as a mere miscommunication. Peeking into the chamber, she notes with frustration that there seems to be a lot of support for Leon's position. She confronts the Beastkin Central Commonwealth Chief of State, Labra. He explains that despite their efforts to build a friendly relationship with Hitoshi, deep-rooted concerns remain within Parliament. Tonliko pleads for him to do something, but Labra claims his hands are tied. He explains that Parliament's voice is that of the people, and even if they suppressed it temporarily, their control would eventually waver. Attempting to silence the dissent would likely only stoke the flames of distrust. When the time comes that it reaches its limit, he fears they would lose Hitoshi for good. As Hitoshi is escorted by guards, the chief concludes that this risk will remain as long as the Hito are a mystery. As Hitoshi walks away, flanked by guards, Dr. Drill tells Tonliko that they must spare no time in uncovering the intricacies of the Hito, as there is no other way to protect him. At a large, domed research facility, a new experiment begins. A machine whirs to life, its screen displaying standing by as the crowd gasps. Alongside Hitoshi, Tonliko and a red panda colleague watch in amazement as it responds. Hitoshi demonstrates his specialized spacesuit, which contains a high-performance thinking machine. The machine has stockpiled the immense knowledge of 100 libraries within it. As a symbol of friendship, he agrees to share a piece of it, startling a nearby Kimo as a beam of light projects from the suit. The suit projects a dazzling array of holographic images showing scenes from Earth. The crowd marvels at the tall buildings and wonders how so many Hito could be recorded in such a way. Two Kimo wonder about a strange music accompanying the projections. Tonliko realizes just how advanced Hito society is from these depictions. She recognizes that the images of their transport, lifestyles, and technology contain the information their government is desperate to obtain. However, the enthusiastic crowd immediately starts peppering Hitoshi with questions about what they're seeing. Surrounded by curious onlookers, Tonliko understands that the only way Hitoshi can explain any of this is through writing. The crowd swarms Hitoshi, their excitement making it impossible to communicate effectively. Watching the chaos, Tonliko clenches her fist, declaring that the time has finally come. She resolves that they must learn the alien language spoken by the Hito. In a prepared room, equipment like logbooks and a gramophone are set up for the lesson. An aide announces that the professor has arrived. Professor Fenix, a speech linguist, introduces himself, stating his great interest in hearing this unknown language. Professor Fenix demonstrates his perfect pitch by replicating a sound on the piano, impressing everyone. Dr. Drill sees the utility but cautions that it will be very difficult to learn the language, though Tonliko remains optimistic. A bear-like Kimo notes that previous observations verified Hito have a narrower vocal range than Kimo, testing the professor with another sound. Tonliko explains her theory. While their language is too hard for a Hito, it's theoretically possible for them to speak his language instead. She turns to Hitoshi and suggests they start with a children's fairy tale. Looking at him expectantly, she says, "I'd like to hear you speaking." Hitoshi begins to speak, his words manifesting as a visual story of a couple finding a tiny girl in a bamboo stalk, leaving the Kimo completely baffled. As Hitoshi continues his story, a Kimo questions if this is really his voice. Another exclaims that it doesn't sound anything like a language to them. A pig-like Kimo has a realization. The music they heard earlier was actually the sound of Hito speaking. Placing her hand on Hitoshi's throat, Tonliko feels it vibrating and exclaims it is like he has an instrument inside him. Dr. Drill explains that Hito can move their throats and mouths to create a range of tones far beyond what Kimo can achieve. He concedes that even hearing the notes, grasping the sequence and intonation would be extremely difficult, let alone producing it themselves. Looking downcast, Tonliko admits to herself that she was being hasty. Professor Fenix, frustrated, explains they couldn't comprehend the story of a princess from a bamboo stalk who left to live on the moon. Dr. Drill suggests that while writing is a burden on Hitoshi, they can manage it with better schedules to prevent misunderstandings. Tonliko quietly states that there's no need for them to focus so much on reproducing his language. When Dr. Drill and Professor Fenix look at her inquisitively, she quietly admits, "I just thought, perhaps he was lonely." Tonliko explains that while viewing Hito civilization, she felt an immense sense of solitude. Seeing the unfamiliar town and words made an anxiety well up inside her, as if she were lost and separated from friends. That's when she suddenly realized. She explains that this might be how Hitoshi feels, surrounded by everyone speaking a language he can't. Professor Fenix and Tonliko agree that even with writing, there are feelings only a voice can convey, and learning his language would be a great way to repay him. It would be an incredible way to pay him back for his efforts in learning their language. Dr. Drill looks down, ashamed, admitting he was making excuses in an attempt to run from new knowledge. Professor Fenix agrees, feeling embarrassed to have shied away from their far-flung friend. Inspired, the other Kimo eagerly volunteer to try as well, to Tonliko's delight. Dr. Drill explains that while they can't imitate the Hito's throat, they might be able to do so with their mouths. With this, their intense training began, with Professor Fenix leading them as a chorus to reproduce the sounds. One Kimo even uses stilts, exclaiming that it's important to stand at Hitoshi's height to learn his language. 7 days later, they gather at the State Concert Hall. Hitoshi sits in the audience with Dr. Drill, watching the stage. On stage, Tonliko smiles warmly and welcomes Hitoshi. She announces that they wish to present him with a gift in recognition of his efforts to learn their language. Without further ado, she introduces a performance of the story Princess Kaguya by the committee members. She takes a deep inhale, preparing to start the performance. The story begins with an elderly Kimo couple discovering a small cat-girl princess inside a glowing bamboo stalk. They take her back to their humble home in the woods. The couple lovingly plays with the young princess as she grows. The princess grows into a beautiful young woman, admired by many suitors. However, her time is short, and her parents watch tearfully as a celestial carriage arrives to take her back to the moon. In their version of the story, the Kimo frantically build a large projectile. After a rousing speech, they load a capsule into a massive cannon. The cannon fires with a massive blast, sending the capsule hurtling toward the moon as the crowd cheers. The capsule hurtles towards the moon, which now bears the angry face of director Leon. It collides directly with the moon's face, and the elderly Kimo couple celebrate with a triumphant "heck yeah." The performance ends disastrously as a prop snaps and a performer cries out in pain. Other performers collapse from the strain, unable to continue. Soon, the entire stage is littered with the exhausted and defeated bodies of the cast. Defeated, Tonliko laments that even with all their effort, they couldn't make it to the end of the story. She had thought they could handle it, and truly believed she had found a way to pay him back. As she despairs, she hears a dry popping sound and wonders what it could be. The sound is Hitoshi, who has stood up and is applauding their effort. Afterward, Hitoshi expresses his deep gratitude to the committee, though they hesitate to call the performance a success. Tonliko thinks Hitoshi is just being mature, but Dr. Drill insists his gratitude is genuine. Surprised, Tonliko notes that this is a rare sentiment from the doctor, who explains he's just trying to see things from Hitoshi's perspective. Dr. Drill explains that if Hitoshi's words are to be believed, his planet is gone and his journey exceeded its lifespan. He reflects on the immense solitude and pressure Hitoshi must feel, knowing his native language will die with him. Dr. Drill tells Hitoshi that even if their attempt was a failure, they managed to take some of that weight from him. His voice, formerly doomed to fade into the void, has now found a place on their planet. He wonders what the princess in their mishandled retelling would have thought if her friends had managed to follow her to the moon. He believes that if their absurd actions have connected them to something greater, then the research has been an incredible success. In a rural Kimo community, a young horse boy helps with the chores, effortlessly hoisting sacks. He proudly declares the work is easy peasy, introducing himself as Stalio. His parents watch with pride, his father confident that Stalio will one day be a great courier. Stalio's father flexes, proclaiming that no one holds things like they can. His mother tells him not to worry about grades when he has muscles. The father dismisses the new trains that reek of charcoal, believing their family's strength is all that's needed. As his parents continue their proud boasts, Stalio announces he's off to school. He runs down the path, waving goodbye as he goes to meet his friends. On the path to school, Stalio's friends discuss whether they've finished their homework. Stalio catches up, playfully grabbing one by the head when they tease him for not wanting anyone to get ahead. When his friend mentions that homework is necessary to become a train conductor, Stalio scoffs at the idea. He declares that studying is a waste of time since their species defines their futures anyway, just as their teacher calls out to the group. The teacher runs towards them, looking frantic, and announces that there's an emergency. She reveals that a Hito is coming to their school today. The news is met with a collective, shocked cry of disbelief from the students. At the Central Beastkin Commonwealth Chief's residence, Chief Labra asks Tonliko for a status report. Tonliko stands before him and reports that things are going very well. She explains that as their first step in understanding Hito civilization, they have sought to grasp their language, and she feels that while progress is slow, it is working. Chief Labra listens and calls it a wonderful, if ambitious, project. Tonliko agrees, but insists they cannot afford to slow down their information gathering on the Hito's world. She explains that because Hitoshi is a representative of his civilization, even simple phrases require careful wording, which takes time. No matter how friendly he seems, his words will decide their future relationship, so he must choose them with care. Tonliko reflects that Hitoshi was just a civilian and shouldn't have to bear such a political burden, wondering how to ease his tensions. Suddenly, Chief Labra declares he has an idea, looking toward the Werepanda Elementary School. And so, Hitoshi paid a visit to the school, but Tonliko notes with trepidation that things didn't go quite as planned. Hitoshi finds himself playfully dogpiled by the Kimo children. Chief Labra's thought was that by interacting with children, Hitoshi could speak more freely, and Tonliko agrees it removed any reason to be formal. The kids shout that the Hito is weak, and Tonliko laments that the situation has become the opposite extreme, completely lacking in courtesy. The teacher tries to restore order as Stalio warns the others not to let their guard down, spouting propaganda he heard from his father. The teacher introduces Hitoshi as a real alien species for them to observe, asking them to refrain from biting or scratching him. An exasperated Tonliko yells that the visit is for Hitoshi to observe their class, not the other way around. A small student approaches Hitoshi and asks if he can speak Kimo. Hitoshi writes that while he isn't good at speaking, he can communicate through writing, which amazes the children. The students are impressed, and one eagerly raises her hand to ask a question. She bluntly asks why he's bald everywhere except his head, causing Tonliko to silently fume in the background. Hitoshi writes that his lack of body hair is an evolutionary trait for temperature regulation, allowing him to be active in hot climates. He adds that Hito are diverse, with some even lacking hair on their heads, which surprises the students. Stalio interrupts, warning his friend that just talking to a Hito could turn them into a Hitner, but the friend retorts that Hitoshi is writing, not talking. Another student asks why he smells different from them. As one student sniffs him, Hitoshi explains that their varied diet and lifestyle affect their body odor, making it seem unique. The children pepper Hitoshi with questions, and he explains that despite regional variations, they were all one species, and intelligence had nothing to do with race. The questions come thick and fast, asking about his age, gender diversity, and even demanding to see his tail. Watching the unfiltered exchange, Tonliko realizes they are gaining information from a completely new perspective and wonders if this bluntness was what the chief was hoping for. The teacher decides to just watch, realizing the lesson is more engaging than usual and a good way to understand Hitoshi's home. While one student thinks Hitoshi seems nice, Stalio scoffs, saying they're all fooled and repeating his pop's claim that the government has been taken over. He argues that a hairless thing can't be a nice guy, but his friends counter that's just how Hito look. Stalio loudly proclaims that Hito must have been cursed for eating their friends, which is why they're the only species left. The room falls silent as Hitoshi and the other students stare. Stalio stammers, realizing he's gone too far. Before Hitoshi can react, Tonliko erupts in fury, demanding to know what the little brat just said to him. Hitoshi calmly holds up a note, explaining that while Hito were a single species, they had many countries between them. The children are confused, asking what a country is. The teacher explains it's like their different alliances, such as the Miauska Kingdom and the Northern Bear Alliance. Hitoshi clarifies with another note that at its peak, his planet had over 200 different countries. The students are shocked to learn about thousands of languages and beg Hitoshi to speak one for them. He obliges by showing them a clip from a famous movie from his world, which leaves the students speechless. Tonliko narrates that this new language is English, recalling the committee's overwhelming shock when they learned Japanese was just one of thousands of Hito languages. A student reads Hitoshi's next note, explaining that though Hito are one species, their differing countries and cultures led to new discoveries daily. Hitoshi continues, writing that this is why he felt such a strong, inexpressible nostalgia upon first seeing their town. Tonliko is moved by his words. Stalio, however, remains defiant, muttering that Hitoshi won't win him over. His friends call him a blockhead, now eager to hear more from the Hito. As his friends move closer to Hitoshi, Stalio sulks alone, telling them to shut up. Hitoshi watches him from the crowd. Suddenly, Hitoshi grabs Stalio from behind, yanking him backward. Surprised, Stalio demands to know what's happening as Hitoshi holds him firmly in place with a pen poised over his notepad. Hitoshi writes that Stalio can ask him anything, but he won't be let go until he does, much to the other kids' jealousy. Stalio defiantly asks why Hitoshi can write their language. Hitoshi's answer is simple: he wanted to be able to talk to them, so he studied really hard. Struck by this sincere answer, Stalio struggles against his own prejudice. He finally blurts out another question, asking what kind of country English was from. From there, Hitoshi taught everyone about his planet's countries, describing one that held enormous power. He drew maps of another that stretched across an incredible distance. He continued, describing countries that boasted an abundance of citizens and others that were home to bountiful nature. Afterward, Stalio is still fuming, asking if that's enough for his friend. His friend calls him lucky for getting to ask so many questions, but Stalio complains that there's no point in learning about a stupid planet. He yells that it's as useless as learning math and he would have been better off doing push-ups. Hitoshi overhears and writes a question: "Are push-ups what you hope to do in the future?" Stalio retorts that he only does them to train his muscles, and Hitoshi writes back that math is the same. Hitoshi explains that like exercise for the body, math is about laying the foundation for how your brain will work when you're older, leaving Stalio to ponder his words. Hitoshi writes a final message explaining that all studies are fuel for how far they can get in life, and he wants them to focus. Tonliko muses that Hitoshi seems like a student himself and wonders if he spent time like this with his own schoolmates, though she also teases that he sounds like a slacker. Her thought is interrupted as the children, acting without a care in the world, once again playfully dogpile him. Hitoshi playfully yells at the little brats to hold it. The classroom floor is covered with Hitoshi's drawings of Earth's continents and countries, which the Kimo children walk amongst, marveling at the strange and wonderful planet and wishing they could visit someday. One of the students approaches Hitoshi with a final question. She asks him how the Hito managed to make so many countries. He writes that by cherishing their families and helping one another, their civilization naturally expanded across the planet over years. Watching this exchange, Tonliko thinks to herself that Hito are so cute, concluding their language was so fun they just kept creating more countries to use it in. As Hitoshi and Tonliko prepare to leave, the entire class gathers outside to wave goodbye. Waving back, Hitoshi departs, leaving a lasting impression on the children. As the students walk home, they excitedly chatter about how neat Hitoshi was and how they now want to see his planet. Walking with his friends, Stalio quietly wonders to himself how far studying can really get a person. His friends are newly inspired, with one proudly stating he's always studied, while another insists he'll start tomorrow for sure. Another friend vows to study a bunch and make a whole lot of countries. Stalio decides that maybe, just maybe, he'll do his homework next week. Reflecting on their recent visit to the school, Tonliko feels a sense of cautious optimism. Hitoshi has become more relaxed and is sharing information more smoothly. He has brought a wealth of topics from his world, from literature to entertainment. She muses that if they can just keep taking things one step at a time, securing his permanent residency shouldn't be too difficult, but her thoughts are shattered when an aide runs in shouting about an emergency. The aide brandishes a bill addressed to Hitoshi, a demand for all research and accommodation costs to be paid in one lump sum. Tonliko is incensed, demanding to know the meaning of this from the chief. As Chief Labor tries to calm her, she furiously asks who would be shameless enough to send such a thing. Chief Labor regretfully informs her that the bill came from an unexpected source. Minister Ham reveals himself as the sender, stating he was the original financial backer and has now decided to pull his support. Tonliko is aghast, protesting that Ham was supposed to be on their side, but he coldly replies that he has yet to get anything in return for his endorsement. Tonliko argues that for the past few days, Hitoshi has been sharing invaluable information about his home planet's culture. Minister Ham contemptuously crushes his cigar, dismissing silly stories and toys. He roars that he is after technology, space travel, life-extending hibernation, and the energy needed to sustain it all. Minister Ham reveals his plan. In 2 months, he will hold a Hito symposium during a global summit to discuss global cooling. He frames it as a chance for Hitoshi to show the world how friendly he is, a chance Tonliko cannot refuse. Chief Labor grimly notes that if Hitoshi fails to provide anything beneficial, then Minister Ham bellows with a menacing grin, Hitoshi Kaneshima can kiss his life on their planet goodbye. 2 months later, dignitaries arrive at the Global Cooling Summit venue. Minister Ham stands at the entrance, welcoming all the attendees to Central. Chairman Larpo and Chief of Staff Antley comment on the suddenness of this academic assembly for the Hito, their expressions revealing suspicion. Minister Ham smoothly tells Chairman Larpo that Hitoshi himself desires to present his planet's technology. The dignitaries express their keen interest, looking forward to what must be an extraordinary presentation. Inside the vast hall, an announcer asks the attendees to take their seats as the show is about to begin. On stage, Tonliko stands at a podium beside Hitoshi, preparing to begin the symposium. In a prior conversation, Chief Labor had called Ham's symposium a reckless, strong-arm tactic. He explained that Ham intended to use Hitoshi's potential failure to turn the industrial sector and public against them, allowing his political rivals to gain support. Hitoshi had listened intently, grimly concluding that they would have no choice but to give in to Ham's demands. Tonliko had laid out the minister's 3 demands: usage of the spaceship, the secret to hibernation, and the energy source for Hito civilization. She called him a greedy jerk for waiting for the perfect moment to spring his unreasonable demands. Hitoshi refused, stating that the information was closely guarded knowledge that could be used to bolster military power. Tonliko questioned the military application, but Chief Laborer doubted it would be used that way. Tonliko had worried that even if they managed to get through this, future investigations would only intensify, targeting the technology the Chemo desired most. Hitoshi noted the spaceship, sitting just above their atmosphere, was a particular point of interest for security reasons. Faced with this dilemma, he had wondered aloud if there was anything they could present to appease the audience. Back in the present, Tonliko begins the symposium, addressing the advanced energy that drove Hito civilization. She makes a stunning declaration, so Hitoshi has made it clear that under no circumstances will he detail how the energy source works. The announcement sends a shockwave through the room, and Minister Ham stares in disbelief and fury. The audience murmurs in disapproval at what they perceive as an arrogant start, as Tonliko cites safety concerns. Unfazed, she moves on to present the advanced hibernation technology known as cold sleep, clarifying that it isn't strictly hibernation. A dignitary cries out in alarm at the mention of freezing, stating that would simply kill someone. A holographic image materializes as Tonliko explains that life is sustained by microscopic, nanomachines that maintain body tissue in a freezing state. She describes it as an injection of something akin to bacteria, which allows survival for many years, causing Minister Ham to look physically ill. The dignitaries are revolted by the idea of injecting bugs into the body and controlling them like bacteria. Tonliko adds that controlling such technology requires an exceptionally skilled specialist named Haruko, who is on the Hito's ship. At the mention of this name, Hitoshi suddenly stands, grabbing Tonliko and demanding to know who this Haruko is. The audience grows frustrated, the energy source is inaccessible, and the hibernation technology is a bioethical nightmare. They lament that even if they adopt Hito civilization, there's nothing they can do with it. Minister Ham sneers, telling Hitoshi that his excuse to stay on their planet is going up in smoke. Confident that the presentation is a failure, he begins to rise from his seat, bidding the alien boy so long. But just as he moves, Tonliko calmly announces their final topic, a next-generation rocket. She promises not just an explanation but a demonstration as well. Minister Ham freezes mid-motion, his triumphant departure cut short by the unexpected turn of events. In a grand hall, Tonliko stands before an audience of dignitaries and poses a fundamental question: do they know what allows one to travel to space? She uses a metaphor involving Hitoshi throwing a ball at an unbelievable speed, which startles one of the attendees, though she quickly clarifies it's just an example. Tonliko explains the concept of orbital velocity, where an object's horizontal speed balances out gravity, keeping its height from the ground unchanged. Translating the speed into their planet's units, Tonliko announces that orbital velocity is around 30,000 licks per hour. An audience member shouts out the number in disbelief, completely stunned by the figure. The crowd murmurs, acknowledging that this speed far exceeds any they have managed in the past. Tonliko then reveals that to achieve escape velocity and leave the planet's gravity entirely, a speed of 42,000 licks per hour would be required. The audience reels from the new figure, exclaiming over the 42,000 licks. The crowd despairs, wondering how they could ever reach such a speed. Minister Ham reflects on the problem, knowing that flying straight up would require far more propulsion than their current technology can provide. This, Tonliko explains, is where the gas combustion propulsion device comes in, the rocket. In a flashback, a younger Ham is introduced to his new colleagues at a design bureau. His new co-workers are impressed by his drafting skills, noting the clean lines he draws despite his hooves. The team gathers around, amazed at his precision. A gorilla-like co-worker questions why someone so skilled would take such a job, believing he could find better-paying work elsewhere. Lying in his bunk, Ham grins and declares his ambition to build a vehicle to get them to space. His co-workers are shocked but intrigued by the bold idea, with some seeing a potential for profit. When asked how he'll power it in the vacuum of space, Ham confidently states his plan to use combustion for propulsion. Ham explains the simple principle of a solid-fuel rocket, demonstrating how lighting a solidified fuel cylinder can generate thrust, amazing his coworkers. He acknowledges the main problem is control. A simple structure offers no way to manage or stop the propulsion, necessitating a complex combustion chamber. Suddenly, an urgent shout comes from the workshop. They've run into a problem. The team discovers their combustion chamber can't withstand the high-pressure gas temperatures, and their only option is to flood it with coolant. This leads to further complications, as the extreme temperatures cause parts to melt and freeze, compromising the system's airtightness. After countless adjustments, they finally complete a prototype and prepare to start it. The moment they activate it, the prototype erupts in a massive explosion. Ham's chief appears, telling him that's enough and that they've put in an admirable effort. Ham desperately protests, insisting that despite the explosions, they can find a way to perfect the design. The chief calmly states that Ham has done enough, as he has helped him understand how unnecessary the endeavor is. He explains that the project's goal was to assess its viability, but all they proved was that the safety risks would outweigh any possible profits. The chief explains that one of the Bureau's tasks is to remove unsuccessful technology quickly to prevent wasting time on useless research. Despite this, he tells the dejected Ham that he accomplished something remarkable and promises to find him a position befitting his achievements. The memory shifts to Ham's promotion into the Ministry of Industry, a turning point in his career. Back in the present, the dignitaries stand on a coastal test site, awestruck that the Hito have prepared an actual rocket for them to witness. As the launch preparations begin, Tonliko announces a Q&A session. Minister Ham is lost in thought, certain the Hito rocket must be vastly different from his own failed designs. He internally demands to know the secret, convinced some form of magic must be involved. Tonliko explains the rocket's mechanics. A high-pressure pump forces fuel and oxidizer into a combustion chamber, and the ejected gas provides propulsion. The explanation is the very principle Ham failed to realize, and the shock causes him to collapse. Minister Ham staggers up, shouting that there must be more to it, while Tonliko calmly offers to take his question. He furiously insists that a machine like that could never fly. Tonliko clarifies that Hitoshi didn't invent the rocket, he was simply given reliable blueprints and instructions to build it. Ham retorts that he knows such a mechanism could never exist because he's already seen it fail firsthand. Ham insists there must be special materials unique to the Hito's planet, demanding to know what they are. Reading a note from Hitoshi, Tonliko replies that the materials on both their worlds are identical. When Ham argues that no alloy could withstand the heat, Tonliko explains the use of supercooled liquid fuel to also act as a coolant. Ham loses his temper, shouting that such a complicated system would be impossibly fragile and would explode at the slightest contamination. Hitoshi's final note explains that the engineers simply used their expertise to ensure no gaps existed that could allow for contamination. The mention of hair makes Tonliko realize the importance of firm maintenance in such a delicate process. With the questions answered, the announcement is made to begin the launch sequence. The final countdown begins over the coastal launch site. As the final second is called, Minister Ham watches with a heavy heart. At 0, the rocket's engines ignite, bathing the launch pad in light and smoke. The rocket soars into the sky, leaving a brilliant trail as it ascends toward space. Watching its ascent, Minister Ham realizes that Hito civilization is not a far-flung fantasy, but something tangible and real. The other dignitaries realize the Hito are their brethren, governed by the same physical laws, and feel inspired that they too can catch up. Tonliko formally concludes the symposium, calling the rocket a symbol of their two civilizations meeting, and thanks the audience for attending. Minister Ham reflects that his past endeavors weren't wrong, he simply fell short of the goal. An old acquaintance, Drill, approaches Ham, observing that the demonstration has shown him the endless nature of research. Drill philosophizes that research often halts for practical reasons, and he ponders how the Hito managed to overcome similar obstacles to progress so far. Tonliko confronts Minister Ham, demanding he rescind the invoices he sent them. Ham, revitalized, scoffs at the idea, realizing the situation is no longer so simple. He lays out the immense undertaking now before them, building factories, manufacturing parts with unprecedented precision, and staffing the entire operation. Hitoshi confirms this, stating that there are no shortcuts to achieving what they just witnessed. With a predatory grin, Ham declares he won't let Hitoshi leave until they can get a rocket of their own into the sky. Tonliko is stunned by the minister's sudden change of heart. Hitoshi presents Ham with a document explaining that while the symposium was one reason for the presentation, another was to promote regulatory laws for the technology. Ham scoffs, asking if Hitoshi is seriously telling him to regulate technology that doesn't even exist yet. As the group walks off, Ham bellows that they have 100 years to get there, while Tonliko muses that for Hitoshi, that timeframe might feel very short. A new journey is about to begin. At a mine, workers who were once discarding certain rocks as impurities now fight over them, each claiming ownership. A dog-like miner calls the others blockheads for not realizing the rocks mixed in with the good stuff were just impurities, but another worker retorts that he is the real blockhead. A miner reveals that the government has just announced these are the raw materials needed for a new Hito contraption, and the whole world is scrambling to get them. What was once trash is now hailed as the material of the future, its value skyrocketing. All over the world, people become obsessed with the Hito's influence, fighting over land and resources. However, in a government chamber, a group of officials expresses deep concern, viewing this development as a poison that will disrupt the balance of their society. At the podium, Director Leon roars that they must immediately cut off all exchanges with the Hito before irreparable damage is done to their environment and industries. Minister Ham of the Office of Science and Industry slowly approaches his own podium to respond. He calmly states that he has heard similar concerns arise in the past between the public and government regarding the introduction of electricity and even railways. Minister Ham paints a picture of the past, asking what their society would be like now if their people had chosen to surrender to adversity back then. Pointing aggressively, Ham declares that the public has decided they want to work with the Hito, even knowing the risks, and he will push this as far as he can. He warns Director Leon not to even think about interfering with his business before it's even off the ground. Watching from the side, Tonliko reflects that the intense debates between Minister Ham and Director Leon have been going on for days, finding Ham's passion reassuring. Hitoshi explains that the knowledge he offered is even more important than the rocket itself, greatly raising his standing in their society. Tonliko notes that despite his rising status, Hitoshi still seems to have his own concerns about the current situation. Hitoshi had asked an official about creating laws to prohibit equipping explosives and provided warnings about the adversity his people had faced. The official dismissed the request, exclaiming that they don't have fireworks of that size and don't need such a law. Tonliko recalls feeling a sense of unease when Hitoshi spoke about these things. He requested permission to study their history to resolve these feelings of unease. The chief denied Hitoshi's request, stating it was best not to allow him access to their history in case any aspect of it might touch a nerve. Noticing his contemplative state, Tonliko suggests that since they have strong support now, they could take a break and go on a research tour, a date to learn about their culture. Left without official access, Hitoshi falls silent, seemingly formulating a new plan. With his official request denied, Hitoshi has a plan of his own. A small library patron struggles to reach a book on a high shelf. A muscular librarian named Gorillarilla effortlessly retrieves it for him. Just then, a colleague calls out to her, asking her to come over for a moment. He explains that a strange letter has arrived at the Wananabani library. Her colleague hands Gorillarilla the letter, explaining that while it isn't addressed to anyone, it has a sender's address, so he doubts it's a prank. She begins to read the letter, which starts with an apology for its suddenness. The writer explains they are staying in town, but find it difficult to visit the library due to their profession, and they wonder if she would be willing to pick out a few history books for them. Gorillarilla is immediately struck by the gorgeous handwriting, wondering what sort of chemo could have written it. And so, Gorillarilla began exchanging letters with this mysterious, nameless book lover. Another letter arrives, thanking her for the books and asking for more, this time on maritime transports. She wonders how they finished the books so quickly, musing they must be a speed reader. She quickly dismisses the thought, chuckling to herself that a chemo with such fine handwriting would never be so crude as to simply skim. The anonymous pen pals requests covered everything from industry and transportation to newly discovered technologies. The pen pal went on to grasp for any concept they could get their hands on. It seemed as though they were tracing the history of her civilization backward, and she felt as if she was part of the search. Though Gorillarilla is clueless as to why they're putting in all this effort, she feels as if she's along for the ride, searching for whatever treasure they seek. Radio broadcasts detail political maneuvering, with the Alliance arguing for Sir Kaneshima's transfer based on him entering their territory. Patrons discuss the news, remarking that it sounds like everyone is trying to prevent one country from monopolizing the Hito. Her patrons bring her tea, noting that while the world has Hito fever, Rilla is focused on her pen pal instead. She continues her work, pondering that even after all these books, her correspondent still hasn't seemed to find what they're looking for. Gorillarilla reflects on the nature of her pen pal's letters, where they send impressions on the stories and locations in the books. Though she knows it might be a misunderstanding, their words always sound nostalgic or regretful, as if they are writing about a hometown that is somehow out of reach. She sympathetically thinks to herself that she's sure their planet was just as beautiful. Eventually, their final letter arrived. The request was simple and direct, asking if she had any books that tell of this world's wars. Gorillarilla is taken aback, repeating the words "our wars" to herself. She realizes the myths are kept on other shelves, understanding that the search is drawing ever closer to a dark and serious subject. According to chemo history, long ago there were beings who walked upon two legs. These bipedal creatures preyed upon those who walked on four, and even on those with smooth bodies. As countless different species arose, defined by their ears and noses, so too did countless countries, leading to endless wars stoked by claw and fang. To end the conflict, the wisest among them gathered before the deity of hair, Mosa. In exchange for sacrifice, they were bestowed with the knowledge of language. From the combination of their tongues and fangs, words came forth, thus ending the wars. This new ability heralded the beginning of the era of speech. And from these origins they became what they are today, chemo. An elderly researcher recounts how their situation changed in the blink of an eye. Out of the blue, Hitoshi decided to stop providing them with any information on Hito technology. The sudden halt to all information, including their culture and industries, caused outright confusion within the research committee. The researcher couldn't pinpoint why, but he could tell something about Hitoshi had changed. Tonliko gasps, a sudden worry crossing her mind. She momentarily wonders if she was the cause, having distracted him from his research. But as Hitoshi gently scratches under her chin, she feels a wave of relief, dismissing the thought. Her relief is short-lived as the gravity of the situation hits her. This is a massive problem. Realizing they cannot afford to alienate Hitoshi, she knows she must inform the minister, regardless of the reason for his silence. In his office, Minister Ham listens to her report, admitting they still don't know when they can begin manufacturing, even with the materials Hitoshi has already shared. Minister Ham seems unconcerned, stating that the blueprints they currently possess are enough to keep Parliament in check for now. He reveals that they were about to halt the information flow anyway, as other countries were getting too close to sensitive data about the Hito's world. He tells Tonliko to let Hitoshi know he isn't the one deciding the fate of their world. The minister concludes that, at any rate, this development has bought them some time. Later, the elderly researcher warns Tonliko to keep her optimism in check, as they can't predict how others might act. Tonliko confidently replies that they will be fine, as Chief Laborer can simply protect Hitoshi like usual. The researcher stops her, questioning her belief that the chief has been protecting Hitoshi. He calls it a dangerous misunderstanding, Lady Tonliko. The researcher reveals his true feelings about the chief, stating he doesn't know a single chemo more frightening than him. Elsewhere, Director Leon frantically chases after the chief, pleading for him to listen. He roars in frustration, lamenting that no one seems to realize how truly dangerous the Hito is. Director Leon continues his tirade, describing the Hito as creatures lost to endless war. He claims their abnormal physical functions and technological advancements were acquired for the sole purpose of killing their own kind. While the inspection committee dismissed an invasion, Leon believes the Hito's true goal in spreading their technology is to sow the seeds of war on their planet. He argues that the rocket was just bait, a means to make them dependent on Hito tech and create laws that give the Hito power over them. He calls it a pathogen, a disease of war they had cured themselves of in ancient times, and insists they must cast it out immediately. The chief calmly turns to Director Leon, remarking that his sense for detecting danger is truly remarkable and that appointing him as director was a good decision. Leon, though grateful, is cut off by the chief, who states they may never know the truth. The chief adds that while the rocket was compelling, its ultimate limit will always be space travel, leaving Leon confused. The chief explains that the Hito did not come from a nearby future, but holds power on a scale they cannot yet comprehend. Therefore, no matter what, they must extract anything and everything they can from him while he is still among them. The question is not what they must defend against, but what they must require from him. With gleaming eyes, the chief reveals his true, chilling ambition: to gain the very essence of the Hito and for the chemo to become humanity themselves. A researcher bursts into the room where Tonliko and the elderly researcher are, yelling that there is a problem. He reports that Hitoshi has been taken away by some sort of special police force. A hooded figure explains that the ones who detained Sir Hitoshi were from the High Special Police Force. He elaborates that they are enforcers appointed by Director Leon, tasked with carrying out extralegal punishment in times of emergency. When Tonliko demands to know the charges, she's told they've judged Hitoshi's actions as hostile, at least for now. The accusation is that Hitoshi's goal is to exploit and disrupt their society, evidenced by his initial willingness to share transformative information before cutting it off. The figure clarifies that this is merely a ploy to get Hitoshi to expose himself through the courts, as the government hasn't officially recognized it as such. Confused and frustrated, Tonliko questions why Director Leon is resorting to such tactics, admitting to herself that she hasn't the slightest idea. As the chapter titled Hito on Trial begins, the hooded Chemo speculates that perhaps something particularly appalling drove Director Leon to this state of bottomless greed. Hitoshi sits alone in a sparse special detention cell at the Gargan stronghold. Tonliko arrives with the elderly researcher and calls out Hitoshi's name in distress. The researcher explains that Hitoshi is only in minimal security due to his compliance and that they've been granted writing materials to facilitate communication. Tonliko questions why Hitoshi is apologizing after he writes that he is truly sorry for what he has done. She observes that he seems absolutely haggard, looking even more tired than during his previous confinement. The researcher states they don't have much time and gets straight to the point. He explains that the faction opposing Hitoshi is launching an all-out offensive with Director Leon. This faction is now spreading propaganda, blaming Hitoshi for everything to regain their footing after the symposium. Hitoshi writes that his accusers are right and that he never should have come to this planet. Tonliko vehemently rejects his despair. He continues writing that what he has done there cannot be undone. The researcher concedes that Hitoshi's arrival has brought many troubles and enemies, with more likely to come. But he counters that with Hitoshi's coming, their closed-off world has expanded far into space. The researcher reminds Hitoshi of all they've gained. They learned his words, studied his maps, and witnessed his rockets. Because of this, the empty vacuum they once thought space to be has now gained immeasurable meaning. The researcher tells Hitoshi he could never consider his arrival a mistake. Hitoshi responds by writing a request to hold judgment on their encounter for a little while longer. Fired up, Tonliko grabs Hitoshi, agreeing that the road ahead is still long and they will boldly face Director Leon within the law. She vows to face Director Leon and absolutely demolish him in court. She pleads with Hitoshi to believe in them, stating that everything they have done has been for this moment. Tonliko, full of energy, declares that they should give the hearing today everything they've got, startling Hitoshi. Hitoshi writes that on his world, it's rare to go straight to trial and clarifies that by today, he means right now. The researcher advises Hitoshi that he can let his guard down and just needs to speak plainly about his experiences on their planet. He tells Hitoshi to simply take it easy as they face the empty courtroom where the legal battle will begin. A court official presents Hitoshi with his pre-trial appetizer. Nearby, Tonliko and Dr. Drill force themselves to eat the notoriously unappetizing courtroom meal. Unsurprisingly, the food does not sit well with Hitoshi, who clutches his stomach in discomfort. Presiding Judge Elefante announces that since everyone has finished eating, the proceedings may begin. From his bench, he addresses the packed courtroom, initiating a speedy trial to decide Hitoshi's fate. The judge asks the prosecution to present their case, to which Laika agrees. Special counsel Laika steps forward, announcing his intent to begin by questioning what exactly Kaneshima desires. He poses a rhetorical question to the court. Why did Hitoshi leave his home planet? Was it really just to meet them? Laika confidently refutes the idea that Hitoshi's journey was for peaceful contact. He elaborates that reaching their world, regardless of the Hito's technological advancement, would have been a monumental undertaking. Therefore, Laika posits, Hitoshi must have come to conquer their world, seeing the Chemo as insignificant creatures. Laika stresses that no matter how well they think they know him, Hitoshi remains an alien. Director Leon interjects, voicing his suspicion and demanding to know how anyone can be sure the Hito will not turn on them. Laika amplifies the fear, asking why they should keep such a dangerous creature and what would happen if he summoned a horde of his species. Tonliko objects forcefully, decrying the prosecution's suspicions as baseless delusion. She asserts they can prove it's impossible for Hitoshi to summon his brethren and calls for her expert witness. The esteemed Dr. Butter slowly makes his way forward. The crowd murmurs in surprise at the appearance of such a famous figure. The audience recognizes Dr. Butter as the very father of modern science who unified concepts of time and distance. His presence speaks to the influence of Dr. Drill, who managed to summon such a distinguished figure. Tonliko proudly presents a formula Hitoshi wrote, asking Dr. Butter to inspect it for the court. She asks him to confirm the calculations and explain the impossibility of interstellar communication, but the doctor remains silent. Tonliko stares in shock as Dr. Butter seems to have completely shut down. Dr. Drill speculates that the sheer cosmic scale of the problem may have overloaded the old doctor's brain, though he notes he is still alive. As Tonliko recoils, Laika smugly notes that her counterargument has failed and asks to continue. Leica points accusingly, insisting that even without reinforcements, Hitoshi's one-man invasion of their planet continues. Leica questions how they could possibly compete with the alien materials and technology Hitoshi has introduced. He warns that with control over the supply, Hitoshi would create a society of unilateral exploitation, leaving them helpless. Leica concludes that their only option to resist would be to wage war, an outcome he deems inevitable. A supporter bursts into the courtroom, objecting and demanding to know what Leica knows of the kindness Hitoshi has shown them. Tonliko is moved as the supporter announces they even have messages of encouragement from an elementary school. Others join in, passionately recounting how much Hitoshi taught them about his culture, art, and humor. Tonliko presents another piece of evidence, a testimony from Minister Ham of the Ministry of Industry and Technology. In his letter, the minister vouches for Hitoshi's thoughtful nature and expresses grave concern over Director Leon's heavy-handed tactics. Dr. Drill argues that no matter how the prosecution tries to paint Hitoshi negatively, those who know him can prove his integrity. He concedes that the Hito's motives might be unknown, but insists that Hitoshi's sincerity is undeniable. A supporter condemns the prosecution's rude and unjust actions which have taken advantage of the state of emergency. Another supporter states firmly that since his arrival, Hitoshi has been an irreplaceable friend to them. Tonliko concludes her defense, begging the court to make a judgment that reflects the dignity Hitoshi has displayed. Director Leon angrily questions how anyone could call Hitoshi a friend, while the judge insists they must review all evidence. Leon continues his outburst, screaming that no one understands the danger and that Hitoshi's presence will destroy everything. Judge Elefante commands silence from the gallery. Director Leon sneers, assuming Hitoshi sees them as idiots for not preparing for war. He yells directly at Hitoshi, betting he can't even conceive of a world without conflict, again ignoring the judge's call for silence. Hitoshi quietly responds, acknowledging that peace may mean nothing to someone like Leon, but it is still a precious thing. Enraged, Director Leon gets in Hitoshi's face, roaring that those who have overcome war are the advanced species. He demands the disgusting monster leave their planet, as Hitoshi's stomach churns. At a signal from the judge, the jury members approach Hitoshi and begin to deeply inhale his scent. Director Leon offers a disingenuous apology before continuing his rant. He screams at Hitoshi, accusing him of coming to their planet only because he destroyed his own. As Hitoshi's stomach growls in distress, Leon calls him an intergalactic cancer and tells him to have some shame. The Kamo continue their olfactory inspection of Hitoshi, as the judge murmurs, "I see." A member of the jury, a squirrel-like Kimo, delivers his finding. He cannot smell any ill intent from Hitoshi. Other jury members concur, observing that Hitoshi has remained calm and lacks any malice. Director Leon refuses to accept it, screaming at them to sniff harder. The judge overrules him, explaining that masking deception is impossible, and Hitoshi's scent is one of honesty. Judge Elefante identifies the specific scents wafting from Hitoshi: nervousness, fear, exhaustion, and guilt. He likens this combination of scents to those found on sailors after a sea accident or on doctors who couldn't save a patient. Leon argues that you can't compare an alien to those situations. The judge rebuffs him, asserting that the law applies to everyone within their land, without exception. The judge declares that justice is determined by evidence and scent, regardless of a person's origin or appearance. Therefore, he announces the court's final ruling: Hitoshi Kaneshima is found innocent. In a courtroom filled with anthropomorphic beings, the verdict on the human, Hitoshi Kaneshima, is about to be read. A court official announces that after a careful examination, no factors indicating violent aggression have been found. From the gallery, where jurors and witnesses have been using their keen sense of smell, it's confirmed that no falsehood or deception has been observed. Presiding Judge Elefante declares that the arguments put forward by the prosecution hold no water, and that all demands for Hitoshi's detention and banishment shall be dismissed. With a resounding bang of his gavel, the judge concludes the judgment and adjourns the court. The gallery erupts with the news, realizing the court has finally decided whether the Hito is a friend or foe. As Hitoshi stands alone, a voice from the crowd joyfully proclaims that the Hito is their friend. Another voice echoes the sentiment, declaring them a safe species. Outside the courtroom, Hitoshi's supporters celebrate his victory in a group hug. Nearby, Director Leon roars in disbelief, unable to accept the verdict. Tonliko feels a quiet sense of vindication, reflecting that Hitoshi's innocence has been proven, and he is now a trusted member of their society. Judge Elefante reflects on the difficult trial, pain that Hitoshi had to endure so much pressure, but glad he has conclusively won his right to live among them. Tonliko smirks to herself, confident that they were always going to win from the very beginning. She recalls the misunderstandings and mortal dangers they faced along the way to this victory. Tonliko embraces Hitoshi, reaffirming to herself that she has never smelled anything frightening from him since the day they met. As Director Leon questions her actions, Hitoshi calmly tells her it's all over, praising her excellent work. Flustered, Tonliko explains she was just renewing her scent on him. Laika concedes defeat, telling Hitoshi he completely annihilated them in court and is now officially free. Director Leon angrily confronts Laika, accusing him of sucking up to Hitoshi after making such harsh accusations. Laika explains their fears, hoping for forgiveness, as they were worried about the possibility of more Hito invading their world. Dr. Drill interjects, stating those fears should have been dispelled by Hitoshi's unique scent, which proves he is alone on the planet. Laika reveals that he is aware of rumors about a Hito army appearing on their planet. Dr. Drill reacts with stunned disbelief. Laika elaborates that reports of a disciplined horde of Hito, essentially an army, began to surface shortly after the symposium. An enraged Director Leon grabs Laika, demanding to know why this shocking information wasn't brought up in court. Laika calmly explains that Chief Labor himself ordered him to remain silent until after the verdict was decided. Dr. Drill is left reeling, wondering what the chief could possibly be thinking. Meanwhile, Hitoshi holds up a paper with his own testimony, declaring that it is theoretically impossible for any other humans to have reached this planet. Laika dismisses the rumors, stating that with the verdict decided, he now finds them dubious at best. He recounts some of the more absurd tales, such as Hito hatching from eggs like insects. He continues, mentioning other tall tales like them strapping rockets to their bodies to fly, or even being headless. Clinging to Hitoshi's leg, Tonliko furiously shouts that these are nothing but irrelevant and ill-mannered tall tales. She continues to yell that insulting Hitoshi after his innocence has been proven is unacceptable. Her voice rises as she declares his actions are entirely. A dark, heavy pressure fills the room, and even Judge Elefante looks on in stunned silence. Dr. Drill is frozen, his expression a mask of shock. Laika and Leon are equally terrified by the sudden, oppressive change in atmosphere. The source of the terrifying aura is Hitoshi. He stands tall, his face obscured by shadow, emanating a palpable sense of menace. Tonliko stands beside him, looking up with a mixture of confusion and concern. With his face completely shrouded in darkness, Hitoshi utters a single chilling word, Haruko. In an instant, things have suddenly turned on their head. In a world of